The rain always brought the dreams. It started with the roar of a monstrous engine, the sleek, immaculate purr of a luxury sports car tearing down a winding, cliffside road. The world was a blur of dark asphalt, and blinding headlights cutting through the torrential downpour. There was a sensation of arrogant invincibility, a feeling of being on top of the world. The man behind the wheel was a master of his craft, a surgeon whose hands were insured for millions. Then came the distraction. A glance at an X-ray on a glowing screen. A momentary lapse. The taillights of the car ahead flared. The steering wheel jerked violently. The tires lost their grip, squealing against the slick road. Time seemed to fracture, slowing down to an agonizing crawl. The front of the car crumpled against another vehicle, sending the sports car spinning over the edge of the cliff. The sensation of free fall was stomach-churning. Then, the brutal, deafening cacophony of twisting metal, shattering glass, and deploying airbags. Pain. Agonizing, white-hot, mind-shattering pain. It radiated from the hands. The precious, life-saving, multi-million-dollar hands were crushed beneath the dash, pinned by the unforgiving weight of a ruined dashboard. Screams tore from a throat that felt raw, choking on the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of burning oil. Then, the darkness would shift. The ruined car vanished, replaced by the biting, unforgiving cold of a snowy mountain peak. Camartage. The scent of sandalwood incense and old parchment filled the air. A woman in yellow robes stood before him, her eyes holding the weight of centuries. "You're a man looking at the world through a keyhole." Her voice echoed, reverberating not in his ears, but in the very core of his soul. "You've spent your life trying to widen it. Your work saved the lives of thousands. What if I told you that reality is one of many?" Glowing orange lines etched themselves into the air, sparks crackling like miniature fireworks, forming a complex, breathtaking mandala of light. A red cloak fluttered in the periphery of his vision, warm and comforting, wiping a tear from his cheek. And then, a new voice. Dark, resonant, echoing from a dimension of infinite, agonizing hunger. "Dormammu, I've come to bargain." Izuku Midoriya gasped, his eyes flying open as he bolted upright in bed. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. He instinctively looked down at his hands. They were small, unscarred, and trembling slightly, but not from nerve damage. They were the smooth, calloused hands of a 14-year-old boy. He flexed his fingers, exhaling a long, shaky breath. There were no pins holding his bones together. No jagged scars running across the knuckles. "Just a dream," Izuku whispered to the empty room, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. Just the same dream. He looked around his bedroom. It was a shrine to his true obsession, All Might. Posters of the #1 hero plastered every inch of wall space, action figures stood in perfectly aligned rows on his shelves, and limited edition bedsheets tangled around his legs. This was his reality. He was Izuku Midoriya, an aspiring hero living in Mizurufu, Japan, in a world where 80% of the population possessed a superhuman ability known as a quirk, and he was part of the 20% that did not. Izuku swung his legs over the side of the bed, his bare feet hitting the cool wooden floor. He walked over to his desk, illuminated by the pale morning light filtering through the blinds. There, sitting next to his Hero Analysis for the Future Volume 12 notebook, was a sketchpad. He didn't just draw heroes in his spare time. Ever since he was a little kid, right around the time the doctor had callously pointed at the extra joint in his pinky toe, and told him to give up his dream, the dreams had started. And with the dreams came a subconscious compulsion. Izuku flipped the sketchpad open. Page after page was filled with incredibly complex geometric patterns. Interlocking circles, squares, and ancient runes that he couldn't read but somehow knew by heart. They looked like magical seals from a fantasy video game, but they were drawn with mathematical precision. Sometimes he drew them without even realizing it, his hand moving on its own while he spaced out in class. He traced the graphite lines of a Tau mandala with his index finger. Whenever he drew these symbols, the phantom ache in his hands faded, replaced by a strange, comforting warmth. "Izuku! Breakfast is ready!" His mother's voice called from the kitchen. "Coming, Mom!" He yelled back, snapping the sketchpad shut. He pushed the lingering memories of snowy mountains and glowing orange sparks to the back of his mind. He had a normal life to live, and a completely impossible dream to chase. Aldera Junior High was an exercise in daily humiliation. Izuku kept his head down as he scribbled furiously in his Hero Analysis Volume 13 notebook. The teacher was droning on at the front of the classroom, holding a stack of career aptitude forms. "Since you're all third years, it's time for you to think seriously about your future," the teacher said, a bored expression on his face. "I'll pass out handouts for your future plans now, but you're all pretty much planning to go into the hero course, right?" The classroom erupted. Quirks flashed everywhere. Students elongated their fingers, blasted water, mutated their faces, and cheered enthusiastically. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks," the teacher sighed, though he was smiling. "But using your powers in school is against the rules. Sensei, don't lump me in with these losers." The loud, arrogant voice cut through the noise like a knife. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet resting on his desk, a smirk plastered across his face. "I'm not gonna be stuck at the bottom with the rest of these rejects." The class immediately turned on him in a chorus of boos and angry shouts. "You should all shut up like the extras you are." Bakugo laughed, small explosions popping in the palms of his hands. Izuku flinched, shrinking further behind his notebook. He and Bakugo, Kaken, had known each other since they were toddlers, but where Bakugo had blossomed into a prodigy with a powerful explosion quirk, Izuku had remained stagnant. Quirkless. A pebble on the side of the road. "Ah, Bakugo, you're aiming for UA High, aren't you?" the teacher noted, looking at his clipboard. The class fell silent. UA was the top hero academy in the nation. The acceptance rate was abysmally low. "That's right." Bakugo vaulted onto his desk, fists clenched triumphantly. "I aced the mock test. I'm the only one at this school who could possibly get into UA. I'll surpass All Might and become the top hero, and my name will be inscribed on the list of the richest, most popular heroes of all time." "Oh," the teacher said, adjusting his glasses. "Midoriya, didn't you want to go to UA too?" The world stopped. Izuku froze, his pencil snapping against the paper. For a split second, the classroom was completely silent. Then, they burst into uproarious laughter. "Midoriya? No way! You can't get into the hero course just by studying. He's quirkless. What's he gonna do, read a book at a villain?" Izuku stood up, his face burning red, waving his hands defensively. They got rid of that rule. There's no rule saying I can't take the exam. It's just, no one's ever done it before." Before he could finish his sentence, an explosion slammed into his desk, blowing it to pieces and sending Izuku crashing backward onto the floor. Bakugo stood over him, smoke rising from his palm, his red eyes burning with absolute fury. "Listen up, Deku! You're even worse than the rest of these rejects. You're quirkless. How can you even stand in the same ring as me?" Izuku scrambled backward until his back hit the wall. "No, wait, Kaken! It's not like I'm trying to compete with you. I swear! It's been my dream since I was little, and I won't know unless I try." "Try what?" Bakugo sneered. "The entrance exam? You'd die in the exam. What can you do?" Izuku looked down, his fists clenching on the floor. For a fleeting moment, an image flashed in his mind. Two hands clad in yellow gloves, twisting the very fabric of space until reality shattered like mirrored glass. The image was so vivid, so visceral, that Izuku felt a strange, detached calm wash over his panic. He is just a boy with firecrackers, a voice, an incredibly cynical, aristocratic voice, whispered in his mind. "Why do you let him frighten you?" Izuku shook his head to clear it, the fear returning. He remained silent until the teacher finally told them to return to their seats. The day dragged on. By the time the final bell rang, Izuku was exhausted. He packed his bag slowly, staring at his notebook. He was just about to put it away when a hand snatched it from his grasp. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Deku, but we're not done," Bakugo said, holding the notebook up. Two of his cronies flanked him. "What's that? Hero analysis for the future?" One of them laughed. "Seriously? You're delusional. Give it back," Izuku pleaded, reaching for it. Instead, Bakugo pressed his palms together, sandwiching the notebook. A sharp boom echoed in the classroom. The notebook was charred black, smoking and half-destroyed. Izuku watched in horror as Bakugo casually tossed it out the open window. It fell 3 stories down into a koi pond below. Most top-tier heroes have stories about their school days. I want mine to be that I was the only student from this garbage middle school to make it into UA, Bakugo said smoothly, leaning in close. So, do me a favor and forget about UA. Bakugo turned to leave, but paused at the door, glancing over his shoulder. If you want a quirk so badly, there might be another way. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building. Izuku froze. The cruelty of the words hit him like a physical blow. He turned, ready to yell, ready to say something, but the explosive glint in Bakugo's hand silenced him. Once he was alone, Izuku slowly walked downstairs and retrieved his notebook from the koi pond, startling the fish away. The pages were soaked, the ink bleeding. Stupid jerk, he muttered, fighting back tears. What if I actually did it? You'd be instigated for suicide. As he walked home, taking the long way under the bridge, he tried to cheer himself up. He practiced his all-might laugh, forcing a smile. He had to keep going. He couldn't let reality beat him down. He just had to work harder than anyone else. He entered the dark, damp tunnel of an underpass. The shadows stretched long and cold across the concrete. Sludge. A strange, gurgling sound echoed behind him. Izuku turned, his eyes widening in sheer terror. Rising from a manhole cover was a towering monstrosity of dark green, viscous sludge. It had 2 bulging eyes and a jagged mouth full of irregular teeth. It smelled like raw sewage and rotting flesh. A medium-sized invisibility cloak. The villain gurgled, its voice wet and guttural. Izuku turned to run, but he was too slow. A massive tendril of sludge lashed out, wrapping around his legs and yanking him backward. Before he could scream, the villain lunged, forcing itself into Izuku's mouth and nose. Don't worry, the villain purred, tightening its grip, crushing Izuku's ribs. I'm just hijacking your body. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. Then, it'll all be over. Panic. Absolute, primal panic. Izuku clawed wildly at the sludge, his fingernails scraping uselessly through the liquid. He couldn't breathe. His lungs were burning, screaming for oxygen. The villain was forcing itself down his throat, filling him up from the inside out. His vision began to blur. The edges of the world darkened, turning black and spotted with stars. His strength was fading. His hands, clawing at the sludge, began to go limp. Is this it? He thought, tears leaking from his eyes. Am I going to die here? Someone, please save me. Then, a metallic clank echoed in the tunnel. A massive figure blocked the entrance of the underpass, silhouetted against the afternoon sun. Fear not, young man. A booming, larger-than-life voice echoed. The villain paused, shrinking back slightly. For I am here. Before Izuku's fading consciousness could process what was happening, the giant moved. The wind pressure alone was staggering. Texas. Smash! A shockwave of air tore through the tunnel like a localized hurricane. The pressure obliterated the sludge, tearing the villain apart into thousands of harmless droplets. Izuku was freed, gasping violently for air as he collapsed to the concrete. As the blackness finally overtook him, the last thing he saw was the towering, muscular form of All Might, the #1 hero, stepping into the light. Hey! Hey! Wake up! A gentle, but massive hand lightly slapped his cheek. Izuku's eyes snapped open. The sky above him was blue, and standing directly over him was the god of heroes himself. Izuku scrambled backward, his heart leaping into his throat. Good! You're awake! All Might boomed, giving a massive thumbs up. Sorry about that back there. I didn't mean to get you caught up in my villain hunt. But thanks to you, I was able to capture him. All Might patted his cargo pants, where 2 large soda bottles were filled to the brim with the captured sludge villain. Izuku couldn't speak. He was hyperventilating, but not from the near-death experience. It was All Might. In the flesh. He was radiating power and charisma. I need an autograph. Izuku stammered, frantically searching for his notebook. He found it lying on the ground, already open to a blank page with a massive signature scrawled across 2 pages. He already signed it. Thank you so much. This will be a family heirloom. All Might laughed heartily. Well, I must be off. I have to get this guy to the police station. Wait! Izuku cried, scrambling to his feet. Already? But I have so many questions. Pros are constantly fighting time and enemies. All Might said, crouching down. See you on the flip side. With a mighty leap, All Might launched himself into the air, soaring toward the clouds. But Izuku hadn't let go. Desperation had overtaken reason. In a split second of sheer madness, Izuku had grabbed onto All Might's leg just as the hero jumped. The wind tore at Izuku's face, making his skin flap violently. The ground was shrinking rapidly beneath him, cars turning into ants, buildings looking like children's blocks. Hey, hey, hey! What are you doing? All Might yelled, looking down in shock. Let go! Your fanaticism is too much. If I let go now, I'll die. Izuku screamed, his eyes squeezed shut, clinging on with a death grip. Oh, right. All Might realized. Hold on, I'll find a place to land. A minute later, they crashed down onto the roof of a random office building. Izuku collapsed onto his hands and knees, shivering uncontrollably. That was terrifying, Izuku mumbled to the concrete. Good grief, All Might sighed, stepping away. If you talk to the people downstairs, they'll let you out. I really must be going. Wait! Izuku called out, scrambling up. Please! Just one question. No! I will not wait. Even if I don't have a quirk, can I become a hero? All Might stopped. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, his fists trembling at his sides. The question he had held on to his entire life. The question that had earned him nothing but ridicule, pity, and violence. Can someone without a quirk be like you? Izuku shouted, the words pouring out of him like a ruptured dam. I've been bullied my whole life. I don't know why, but I think saving people is the coolest thing you can do. I want to save people with a fearless smile. I want to be the greatest hero, just like you. Izuku opened his eyes, hoping to see the smiling face of his idol. Instead, he saw a cloud of thick steam. When the steam cleared, the towering, muscular god of peace was gone. In his place stood a skeletal, emaciated man in baggy clothes, his cheekbones hollow, his eyes sunken into deep, dark sockets. Blood dribbled from the corner of his mouth. Izuku shrieked. What? You deflated. Where is All Might? You're an imposter, the skeletal man sighed, wiping the blood from his chin. I assure you, I am All Might. You know how guys at the pool suck in their gut to look buff? It's like that. Izuku's brain short-circuited. No way. All Might sat down against the rooftop railing with a heavy groan. A fearless smile, huh? Now that you've seen me like this, young man, make sure you don't post about it online. He lifted his baggy shirt. Izuku gasped. Covering the entire left side of All Might's chest was a horrifying, jagged web of purple scar tissue. It looked like a crater, as if his entire side had been blown out and barely stitched back together. I got this in a fight 5 years ago, All Might said quietly, his voice lacking its booming resonance. My respiratory system was nearly destroyed, and I lost my entire stomach. I've had countless surgeries, but I can only work as a hero for about 3 hours a day now. 5 years ago? Izuku muttered, his encyclopedic brain racing. Was that the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? You know your stuff, All Might smiled grimly. But no. That punk couldn't bring me down. I asked that this fight be kept under wraps. The symbol of peace cannot be daunted by evil. I smiled to show the pressure of heroes and to trick the fear inside of me. All Might looked directly into Izuku's eyes. The pity in the hero's gaze was suffocating. Pro-heroes are always risking their lives. Some villains just can't be beaten without powers. So, can you be a hero without a quirk? I honestly don't think so. The words struck Izuku like a physical blow. The world seemed to stop spinning. The hero's words were final. Absolute. A death sentence to his dream. If you want to help people, you could become a police officer, All Might suggested gently, standing up and moving toward the roof access door. They get mocked for just receiving villains that heroes capture, but it's a fine profession. It's not bad to dream, young man. But you have to consider what's realistic. The heavy metal door clanged shut. All Might was gone. Izuku stood alone on the rooftop, the afternoon wind whipping through his green hair. His mind was blank. 14 years of hoping, of enduring explosions and taunts, of taking notes and analyzing battles, all of it, shattered in an instant by the very man who had inspired it. He didn't cry. He was too empty to cry. He slowly walked to the edge of the roof, looking down at the bustling streets below. People were going about their lives, oblivious to the heartbreak occurring above them. Just pray that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life, and take a swan dive off the roof of the building, Bakugo's voice echoed in his head. Izuku grabbed the railing, his knuckles turning white. He squeezed his eyes shut. Forget everything you think you know, Izuku gasped, his eyes flying open. It wasn't Bakugo's voice this time. It was the woman from his dreams. The bald woman in the yellow robes. Her voice wasn't an echo of a memory. It sounded as if she were standing right beside him. He looked around. The roof was empty. I'm losing my mind, Izuku whispered, stepping away from the ledge. I'm actually going crazy. Boom! A massive explosion shattered the quiet afternoon, echoing from a few blocks away. A plume of thick black smoke rose into the sky. Old habits died hard. Without thinking, Izuku moved toward the roof access door, running down the stairs. He needed to see. He needed to take notes. Even if he couldn't be a hero, he couldn't stop the instinct to watch them at work. He ran through the streets, following the smoke and the sound of sirens. A large crowd had gathered at an intersection of a shopping district. Police had set up a barricade. Fires were raging, consuming nearby storefronts. Izuku pushed his way to the front of the crowd, his notebook instinctively in his hand. He froze. In the center of the chaotic intersection, roaring in triumph and tearing down street signs, was the sludge villain. No. Izuku's eyes widened in horror. How? All Might captured him. I saw the bottles. A sickening realization washed over him. When he grabbed All Might's leg, the bottles must have fallen out of his pockets. This is my fault. Because I couldn't let go, because I was selfish. Izuku looked around frantically. Where were the heroes? Death Arms was there, but he couldn't get close. His strength was useless against a liquid enemy. Kamui Woods was hesitating. His wooden branches would instantly catch fire in the surrounding blaze. Empty Lady was standing 2 streets over, complaining that the alley was too narrow for her giant form to enter. Backdraft was busy fighting the fires, unable to assist defensively. Why aren't they doing anything? Izuku whispered, panic rising in his chest. They can't get near him, a bystander said. And the villain took a hostage. A kid. He's using the kid's quirk to keep everyone away. Izuku looked back at the villain. Through the swirling, viscous green mass, he saw a flash of spiky blonde hair. And then, he saw the eyes. Katsuki Bakugo was struggling violently, suffocating, drowning in the sludge just like Izuku had been. He was firing explosions wildly, creating the fires that kept the heroes at bay, but he couldn't break free. The eyes of the most arrogant, powerful boy Izuku knew were wide with absolute, primal terror. They were begging for help. It's my fault, Izuku thought, stepping backward, his legs shaking uncontrollably. He's going to die, and it's my fault. I'm sorry, Kaken. I'm so sorry. Someone will save you. A hero will come, but no one was moving. The pros were waiting for someone with a suitable quirk. They were calculating the risks, waiting for a better opportunity. Bakugo's mouth opened in a silent scream as the sludge forced itself down his throat. His struggles weakened. He was dying. Izuku Midoriya didn't think. If he had thought about it, he would have realized he had no power, no weapon, and no chance. His body simply moved. He sprinted past the police barricade, ignoring the shouts of the heroes. Hey kid! Stop! You'll get yourself killed! Death Arms roared. Izuku didn't hear him. The world tunneled into a single, sharp focus. He tore his backpack off his shoulders and hurled it with all his might. The bag unzipped midair, scattering textbooks, pencil cases, and the ruined hero analysis notebook. The metal edge of his pencil box struck the sludge villain right in the eye. The villain roared in pain, flinching back. The sludge loosened just enough around Bakugo's face. Kaken! Izuku screamed, clawing frantically at the viscous liquid, trying to dig his childhood bully out of the muck. Bakugo gasped for air, coughing violently. Deku? What the hell are you doing here? I don't know. Izuku cried, tears streaming down his face as he dug uselessly at the slime. My legs just moved on their own. You looked like you were asking for help. The sludge villain recovered, its uninjured eye glaring down at Izuku with pure, murderous hatred. You again. The villain gurgled, its voice dripping with malice. I don't know how you escaped earlier, you little brat, but I'm going to tear you apart. A massive tendril of sludge, hardened by sheer density, whipped toward Izuku like a massive baseball bat. Izuku raised his arms to protect himself, shutting his eyes. Wham! The impact was devastating. Izuku was thrown backward, flying through the air before crashing violently into a brick wall. The breath was completely knocked out of his lungs. He slid to the ground, his vision swimming, tasting copper in his mouth. Izuku! Someone screamed in the crowd. Before Izuku could even twitch, the sludge villain was upon him. It abandoned Bakugo momentarily, fueled by rage, and lunged at the boy who had hurt it. A massive wave of slime crashed over Izuku, pinning him against the wall. This time, the villain hissed, forcing a dense glob of sludge straight into Izuku's mouth and down his windpipe. I'll make sure you stay dead. The suffocation was instantaneous. It was worse than before. The force behind the sludge was crushing his ribs. His lungs burned with a searing, agonizing fire. He couldn't move his arms. He couldn't fight back. He was dying. He knew it with absolute certainty. The heroes were too far away. He had thrown his life away, and he hadn't even saved Bakugo. As the oxygen deprivation set in, the world began to fracture. The sounds of the roaring fire, the screaming crowd, and the villain's cruel laughter warped and distorted, stretching out like a tape played at half speed. I'm sorry, Mom, Izuku thought, his consciousness slipping away into the dark. I couldn't be a hero. Suddenly, the darkness shattered. Izuku wasn't in the alleyway anymore. He was floating in an endless expanse of swirling, kaleidoscopic colors. Nebulas of violet and gold exploded around him. Planets made of crystal shattered and reformed in a matter of seconds. There was no sound, only the feeling of an immense, unfathomable presence. He looked down at himself. He wasn't wearing his middle school uniform. He was glowing. A brilliant, translucent, astral projection of himself. Before him, floating in the cosmic void, was another figure. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a sharply trimmed goatee and graying hair at his temples. He wore dark blue robes, heavily layered, secured by a multitude of intricate belts. Over his shoulders draped a majestic, high-collared red cloak. Around his neck hung a heavy golden amulet shaped like an eye. The man opened his eyes. They were a piercing, steely blue, filled with the wisdom of 1,000 lifetimes, the sorrow of 1,000,000 deaths, and the unyielding arrogance of a man who knew he was the smartest person in any universe. So, the man spoke, his voice rich and resonant. It was the voice Izuku had heard in his dreams. It seems we finally meet at the threshold, Izuku. Who are you? Izuku whispered. He realized he didn't need to breathe here. The man smiled, a wry, knowing smirk. I have had many titles. Master of the Mystic Arts. The Sorcerer Supreme. The Guardian of the New York Sanctum. But once, a long time ago, I was Dr. Stephen Strange. Izuku stared at him. Am I dead? Are you God? Strange let out a short, genuine laugh. Hardly. And no, you aren't dead. Not yet. Your physical body is currently in the throes of severe hypoxia. But your soul, our soul, is finally awake. Our soul? Izuku echoed, confusion warring with awe. Strange floated closer, his red cloak rippling in an unseen cosmic wind. The multiverse is vast, Izuku. Infinite. When I died in my universe, my soul was cast into the astral plane, adrift in the currents of reincarnation. It found purchase here, in a world obsessed with genetic mutations they call quirks. It found you, or rather I became you? Izuku shook his head slowly. That's impossible. Quirks are biological. They're genetics. Souls, reincarnation, magic, none of that is real. It defies the laws of thermodynamics, quantum mechanics, basic biology. Oh, please, spare me the lecture, Strange interrupted smoothly, rolling his eyes. I was a neurosurgeon before I was a sorcerer. I clung to science just as stubbornly as you do, but science is merely the language we use to describe the world we understand. Magic is the language of the world we don't. Strange reached out, placing a glowing, scarred hand on Izuku's chest. You were born without a quirk, Izuku, because your spiritual vessel was already full to the brim. The energy required to contain the essence of a sorcerer supreme left no room for biological anomalies. Your physical body couldn't handle the awakening of my memories, until now. The trauma of your impending death has shattered the barrier between your mind and my spirit. The cosmic background began to swirl faster, violently collapsing inward. What does this mean? Izuku asked, a sense of urgency finally piercing his all. Kaken is dying out there. I have to help him. I don't have a quirk. Strange's eyes hardened, a fierce, protective fire burning within them. You don't need one, Strange said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. You have something older. Something infinitely more powerful. The mystic arts are not bound by the genetics of this petty world. They are drawn from other dimensions, from the lifeblood of the multiverse itself. The cosmic void shattered. Strange dissolved into thousands of glowing golden butterflies that rushed toward Izuku, sinking into his chest, his mind, his very being. Memories flooded Izuku's brain with the force of a tsunami. He saw ancient books written in Sanskrit. He felt the cold stone of Kamartaj beneath his boots. He remembered the feeling of opening his first portal, the smell of ozone, the searing heat of battling Dormammu in the dark dimension. He remembered dying. 1,000 times. 1,000,000 times. He remembered the agony, the sacrifice, the unyielding will to protect reality. He knew the hand signs. He knew the incantations. He knew the feeling of drawing multiversal energy through his meridians. Open your eye, Izuku, Strange's voice echoed one last time, fusing perfectly with Izuku's own thoughts. Show them what a true hero looks like. In the alleyway, exactly 3 seconds had passed. The heroes watched in despair as the sludge villain completely engulfed the green-haired boy. Death arms roared in frustration, charging forward, but a massive wall of fire erupted from Bakugo's uncontrolled explosions, forcing the hero back. He's dead! Kamui Woods yelled, shielding his eyes from the heat. The villain killed the kid. Inside the sludge, Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the wide, terrified green eyes of a helpless boy. They were hardened, focused, glowing with an ethereal, golden light. His lungs were empty, screaming for air, but his mind was crystal clear. The panic was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm that he had never possessed before. He could feel the sludge pressing against him, the kinetic force of the villain's grip. Physical matter, Izuku thought, his internal voice carrying a distinctly arrogant, confident edge. How quaint. Despite the crushing pressure, Izuku raised his arms. His muscles screamed in protest, unused to moving against such resistance, but his spirit drove them forward. His index and middle fingers extended, his thumb crossing over his palm. A perfect, flawless mudra. From the tips of his fingers, a single spark erupted. It wasn't fire. It was a crackling, brilliant orange light that smelled intensely of ozone and burning sage. The sludge villain paused, feeling a sudden, intense heat from within its own body. What the? Izuku's hands moved in a fluid, circular motion. The single spark traced a line in the air, leaving a trail of searing, crackling multiversal energy. With a sharp twist of his wrists, the circle closed. Bzzzt. A deafening sound, like a high-voltage cable snapping, echoed over the roar of the fire. A massive, intricate Tau mandala, a shield of pure, geometric magical energy, erupted from Izuku's hands. The golden runes flared with blinding intensity. The sludge villain shrieked in absolute agony. Magic was not physical force. It bypassed the villain's liquid anatomy entirely, searing its very essence. The sludge that made contact with the mandala instantly vaporized into steam. Get off me! The villain roared, involuntarily recoiling. The sludge peeled away from Izuku, dropping him to the ground. Izuku landed on one knee, gasping, pulling glorious, life-saving oxygen into his burning lungs. He coughed violently, expelling the last of the slime from his throat. The crowd was dead silent. The heroes froze, staring in shock at the boy. Izuku didn't look back at them. He slowly stood up. His green hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat and slime, but he stood tall, his posture perfect. His hands were raised, and glowing around both of his fists were two brilliant, rotating discs of orange magical energy. Bakugo, still trapped by his neck, stared at Izuku with wide, disbelieving eyes. Deku, what the hell is that? The sludge villain, enraged by the pain and the loss of its prey, surged forward, forming three massive spikes of hardened liquid. I'll kill you! I'll impale you, you little freak! The spikes shot toward Izuku at bullet-like speeds. Izuku didn't flinch. His photographic memory, a gift from his past life, pulled the exact defensive spell he needed. He slammed his glowing hands together and pulled them apart, stretching the energy shield of the Seraphim. Izuku shouted, though he didn't need to speak the incantation. A massive, domed barrier of golden light flared into existence in front of him. The sludge spikes slammed into the shield. Gong! The sound was like a massive temple bell being struck. The spikes shattered upon impact, unable to pierce the magical barrier. The resulting shockwave blew out the windows of the surrounding shops. Impossible! Death Arms yelled, staring in disbelief. What kind of quirk is that? It's completely materialized energy. Izuku dropped the shield, his mind racing. The physical toll is immense, he analyzed, feeling his muscles burning, trembling under the strain of channeling multiversal energy through an unconditioned, quirkless body. I can't hold this for long. My nervous system is going to fry. I need to end this instantly. He looked at Bakugo, who was still struggling to breathe. Izuku shifted his stance, bringing his right hand back. He manipulated the Tau Mandala, elongating the geometric patterns, twisting the energy until the circular shield collapsed into a long, crackling blade of golden light attached to his wrist. An eldritch whip, modified into a blade. Izuku dashed forward. His speed wasn't superhuman, but his movements were terrifyingly precise. He slid under a sweeping attack from the villain, the golden blade trailing across the concrete, leaving glowing scorch marks in its wake. Die! The villain roared, raising its bulk to crush the boy. Izuku leaped, spinning midair. He slashed the eldritch blade in a wide, sweeping arc. The blade didn't cut the sludge. It severed the molecular bonds holding the villain's liquid form together. With a sound like tearing silk, the golden energy sliced straight through the thickest part of the villain, passing mere inches from Bakugo's face without harming him. The villain's form destabilized violently. The upper half collapsed, shrieking as the magic disrupted its biological structure. The grip on Bakugo shattered entirely. Bakugo fell forward, gasping for air, hitting the ground on his hands and knees. Izuku landed gracefully in a crouch, the golden blade dissipating into sparks. He breathed heavily, a triumphant smile crossing his face. I did it, he thought. But the villain wasn't done. Though destabilized, the sheer mass of the sludge was too great for a single strike to destroy. Reforming furiously, a massive tidal wave of slime rose up behind Izuku, towering over the alleyway, ready to crash down and drown both boys. Izuku tried to raise his hands to cast another shield, but his arms refused to move. The strain had caught up to him. His veins felt like they were filled with molten lead. His vision blurred. Oh, Izuku thought, his knees buckling. Suddenly, a massive figure burst through the crowd, moving faster than the eye could track. I am pathetic. All Might stood between Izuku and the towering wave of sludge. The number one hero was in his muscle form, blood pouring from his mouth, steam radiating from his body. The hero had pushed past his absolute limits, spurred on by the sight of the quirkless boy fighting an impossible battle. I told you what makes a champion, but I didn't live up to my own ideals. All Might roared, drawing his fist back. The air pressure around him seemed to warp. Pros are always risking their lives. All Might threw a punch that tore the very sky apart. Detroit. Smash! The shockwave was apocalyptic. The sheer kinetic force obliterated the sludge villain, scattering its liquid form across the entire district. The concussive blast blew the fires out instantly. The wind was so powerful that it created a localized updraft, pulling the clouds together in the sky above. Seconds later, it began to rain. All Might stood tall amidst the scattered sludge, his chest heaving, steam rolling off his massive frame. He raised a fist to the sky, and the crowd, recovering from the shockwave, erupted into deafening cheers. Izuku watched his idol, all washing over him. The adrenaline was finally leaving his system, replaced by an overwhelming, crushing exhaustion. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling violently, covered in dirt and soot. But deep beneath his skin, in the very center of his palms, faint, intricate orange geometric lines were pulsing softly, fading back into his soul. He wasn't crazy. It was real. The universe was infinitely larger than he had ever imagined, and the keys to its secrets were locked inside his mind. He looked over at Bakugo, who was staring at him with a mixture of terror, confusion, and raw fury. Izuku tried to smile, tried to say something to reassure his old friend. Instead, the world tilted sideways. The edges of his vision went black. The last thing Izuku heard before he lost consciousness was the sound of the rain, hitting the concrete, washing away the ashes of his old life. The quirkless boy had died in that alleyway. The sorcerer had awakened. The transition from waking to sleeping is usually a gradual, gentle descent. For Izuku Midoriya, it was like being violently shoved through a plate glass mirror. He didn't wake up in a hospital bed, nor did he find himself in the familiar, All Might plastered confines of his bedroom. Instead, he found himself standing in the center of an impossible room. The floor beneath his feet was made of polished, dark mahogany, polished to a mirror shine. Massive, intricately carved wooden pillars stretched up into a vaulted ceiling that seemed to disappear into shadowy infinity. Ancient tapestries, woven with threads of gold and silver that seemed to hum with their own internal light, hung from the walls. The air smelled strongly of burning sandalwood, ozone, and old parchment. But the most jarring detail was the window. At the far end of the vast room was a massive, circular window bisected by sweeping, curved lines of leaded glass. And outside that window, there was no sky, no city, no earth. There was only a churning, kaleidoscopic vortex of nebulas, impossibly bright stars, and shifting, fractal geometries that hurt his eyes if he stared at them too long. Izuku looked down at himself. He was not wearing his ruined middle school uniform. He was dressed in simple, flowing robes of dark crimson and navy blue, bound by woven belts. More importantly, his body possessed a strange, ethereal luminescence. He was slightly transparent. The New York sanctum, a voice echoed, bouncing off the cavernous walls. Or, at least, a psychic reconstruction of it. I find it more comforting than the infinite void of the astral plane, don't you? Izuku spun around. Sitting in a high-backed leather armchair, legs crossed casually, was the man from his dreams. He looked exactly as he had in the cosmic void: sharp features, graying temples, a meticulously trimmed goatee, and eyes that held the crushing weight of a multiverse of experiences. He wore identical dark robes, though his shoulders were draped in an imperious, high-collared red cloak that seemed to twitch and sway of its own volition. Dr. Strange, Izuku breathed, his voice sounding hollow, like two voices speaking at once in perfect unison. Take a seat, Izuku. Stephen Strange gestured to an empty leather chair opposite him. Izuku hesitated, then walked forward. He didn't seem to walk so much as glide, his feet barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. He sat down, the leather yielding perfectly to his astral form. Am I in a coma? Izuku asked, his mind racing, pulling medical terminology from a well of knowledge he didn't realize he possessed. The physical strain on my nervous system. I channeled multiversal energy through an unconditioned biological conduit. The sheer voltage of the eldritch magic likely caused a severe neuroelectrical overload, shutting down my higher brain functions to protect my organs from spontaneous combustion. Izuku clamped a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. Did I just say that? Strange smirked, a dry, amused expression that felt strangely familiar to Izuku's own facial muscles. You did. And your diagnosis is entirely accurate. Your physical body is currently lying in a bed at Muzutafu General Hospital. You've been unconscious for 3 days. 3 days? Izuku panicked, trying to stand up, but a gentle, unseen force pressed him back into the chair. My mom, she must be terrified. I have to wake up. I have to. You will wake up when your body has finished repairing the microfractures in your neural pathways, Strange interrupted, his tone authoritative but not unkind. And when we have finished our conversation, we have much to discuss, and in here, time is entirely subjective. A week in the mindscape is but a second in the physical realm. Izuku forced himself to calm down, taking a deep, entirely unnecessary breath. The panic subsided, replaced by an analytical coolness that felt distinctly foreign, yet comfortable. You said you reincarnated, Izuku began, looking at his glowing hands. But quirks are genetic. They are physical mutations in human biology. A soul, magic, reincarnation, none of this fits into the current scientific paradigm of superhuman society. Your society's paradigm is exceptionally narrow, Strange replied, leaning forward, resting his chin on his steepled fingers. They look at a universe of infinite, terrifying, awe-inspiring possibilities, and they categorize it by whether a child can breathe fire or grow extra limbs. It is profound hubris. Strange gestured to the swirling vortex outside the massive window. The multiverse is a living, breathing tapestry of realities. In my reality, there were no quirks. There were mutants, aliens, gods, and monsters, but the power I wielded, the mystic arts, was something else entirely. It is the practice of drawing energy from other dimensions in the multiverse, using spells and incantations to shape that energy into reality. Strange looked deeply at Izuku. When I died, my universe was facing an anomaly. A collapse. I sacrificed myself to stitch the tear in our reality. My physical body was destroyed, but my astral form, my soul, was cast adrift into the multiversal currents. It drifted for eons, seeking a vessel. Why me? Izuku asked softly. Why a quirkless nobody from Japan? Because you were quirkless, Strange stated matter-of-factly. Do you know what a quirk truly is on a spiritual level? Izuku shook his head. A quirk factor is a biological mutation, yes, but it is also a spiritual anchor. It is a dense, highly specialized concentration of energy that ties the soul irrevocably to the physical rules of this specific dimension, Strange explained. If I had attempted to reincarnate into a child with a quirk, the conflicting energies would have caused a metaphysical rejection. The child would have been stillborn. The vessel needed to be completely empty, free of biological anchors. Free of a quirk. Izuku stared at his hands. For 14 years, his lack of a quirk had been a curse. It had been the source of his bullying, his isolation, his deepest insecurities. Bakugo had told him to take a swan dive off a roof because of it. All Might had told him to give up his dream because of it. Now, sitting in the psychic projection of a sorcerer's sanctum, he learned it was the very thing that made him a god among men. So, you possess me? Izuku asked, a tremor of fear returning to his voice. Are you going to take over my body? Erase who I am? Strange's expression softened, the arrogance melting away into a profound, weary sadness. No, Izuku. I am not a parasite. I am not possessing you. I am you. Strange stood up, walking over to Izuku and placing a hand on his shoulder. When a soul reincarnates, the memories of the past life are wiped clean. The trauma, the knowledge, the pain, it is all washed away so the soul can begin anew. For 14 years, you were simply Izuku Midoriya. My memories slept dormant within your subconscious. They bled through only in your dreams, in your instinctual drawings of mandalas, in your unyielding, suicidal drive to save others regardless of the cost. But when you were drowning in that alleyway, Strange continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, when you faced true, agonizing death, the trauma shattered the seal. My memories, my knowledge, my connection to the mystic arts, they flooded into your conscious mind to save our life. Izuku closed his eyes. He could feel it. He didn't just remember Stephen Strange's life like a movie he had watched. He felt it. He felt the cold surgical steel of a scalpel. He felt the devastation of losing his hands. He felt the endless, maddening loops of time against Dormammu. He felt the crushing burden of wearing the eye of Agamotto. We are merging, Izuku whispered, opening his eyes. They glowed with a faint, golden light. Yes, Strange nodded. You are the dominant personality. This is your life, your body, your era. You will not lose your love for your mother, your admiration for your heroes, or your fundamental kindness. But my knowledge, my photographic memory, my mastery of the mystic arts, and perhaps a touch of my insufferable ego, are now yours. Strange stepped back, the red cloak lifting from his shoulders and hovering in the air. You used magic today, Izuku. Pure, unfiltered eldritch magic. You conjured the Tau Mandala and the eldritch whip. You saved your friend. But your body is fragile. It is not conditioned to channel the energies of the multiverse. I need to train, Izuku said, the realization settling over him. I need to build my physical vessel to withstand the voltage. Precisely, Strange smiled. You have the knowledge of a sorcerer supreme, but the physical stamina of a malnourished academic. You must temper your body, or your magic will tear you apart. The sanctum around them began to vibrate. The dark mahogany walls started to dissolve into white mist. The smell of sandalwood was slowly replaced by the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic. It is time for you to wake up, Izuku, Strange said, his form beginning to fade into golden sparks. From this moment on, you are not just a boy playing hero, you are the sole practitioner of the mystic arts in this universe. The burden is heavy. The path is lonely. But you are not entirely alone. I am always here, in the back of your mind. Wait, Izuku reached out as the mist consumed the room. What do I do now? How do I become a hero? Stephen Strange's final smile was a mix of pride and fierce determination. You study, Doctor? You study? The rhythmic, high-pitched beep, beep, beep was the first thing to anchor him to reality. Izuku's physical eyes fluttered open. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room assaulted his retinas. He squinted, groaning softly as a dull ache throbbed behind his temples. His entire body felt like it had been run over by a bullet train, then set on fire, then run over again for good measure. Izuku? The frantic, tear-choked voice belonged to his mother. Before he could even turn his head, Inko Midoriya was throwing her arms carefully around his chest, burying her face in the hospital gown, sobbing uncontrollably. Oh, my baby! My baby boy! You're awake! The doctor said you might not. I was so scared. I thought I'd lost you. Izuku weakly raised a heavy, aching arm and patted his mother's green hair. I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay. As he spoke, he felt a strange sensation in his mind. It was as if a massive filing cabinet had been unlocked in his brain. He glanced at the heart monitor beside his bed. He didn't just see the numbers. His brain instantly recorded the make and model of the machine, the exact rhythm of his heart rate, 72 BPM, steady but showing signs of slight myocardial stress, and a precise serial number etched into the plastic casing. He looked at the medical chart clipped to the end of his bed. From a distance of 6 feet, he could read the doctor's messy handwriting flawlessly. Patient, Midoriya Izuku. Diagnosis: acute physiological exhaustion, minor neurological strain, slight muscular micro-tears. Cause: unknown energy discharge. Photographic memory, Izuku realized, a thrill of adrenaline cutting through the exhaustion. It's real. Strange intellect. It's all here. I was so worried, Inko cried, pulling back to look at his face. When the police called me, they said you jumped into a villain fight. Izuku, what were you thinking? You don't have a quirk. You could have been killed. Izuku opened his mouth to apologize, to give his usual stammering excuse, but the words died on his tongue. He didn't feel like stammering. He didn't feel the crushing inferiority that usually defined his interactions. I had to, Mom, Izuku said calmly, his voice steady and deeper than usual. The heroes were hesitating. Kaken was going to die. I couldn't just stand there and watch a life be extinguished when I had the power to intervene. Inko blinked, her tears pausing for a moment. She looked at her son strangely. He sounded different. Older. More authoritative. Before she could question it, the door to the hospital room swung open. A doctor walked in, looking thoroughly bewildered as he flipped through a manila folder. Behind him stood a tall, impossibly thin man with unruly blonde hair, wearing a baggy yellow suit. Tashinori Yagi. All Might. Izuku's heart skipped a beat, but strangely, the overwhelming, hyperventilating fanboy reaction didn't trigger. He felt a deep, profound respect for the man, but the godlike pedestal he had placed All Might upon had cracked. After all, Izuku now possessed memories of fighting alongside gods, titans, and cosmic entities. All Might was a great man, but he was just a man. Ah, Midoriya, you're awake, the doctor said, adjusting his glasses. How are you feeling? Any numbness in your extremities? Blurry vision? A minor dull ache in the frontal lobe, typical of acute neuroelectrical exhaustion, but my motor functions are intact, Izuku replied smoothly, sitting up slightly. My respiratory system feels a bit inflamed from the sludge inhalation, but my oxygen saturation seems normal. The doctor stopped dead, staring at the 14-year-old boy. Ah, yes. Exactly. That's a very precise self-diagnosis. Inko looked completely lost. Doctor, what happened to him? The police said he used some kind of power. A glowing shield? The doctor sighed, rubbing his temples. Mrs. Midoriya, we've run every test we can. Blood tests, genetic sequencing, X-rays. Biologically speaking, your son is completely quirkless. He has the extra joint in his toe. His DNA shows 0 mutation markers. But the witnesses? Inko protested. We don't know, the doctor admitted helplessly. He expelled an enormous amount of highly localized, materialized energy. It shouldn't be biologically possible. Our best guess is that it's a completely undocumented form of latent quirk awakening that bypasses normal physiological markers. An anomaly. A miracle, really. Izuku kept his face perfectly neutral, though internally, Stephen Strange's consciousness was scoffing at their ignorance. A latent quirk awakening. How painfully provincial. I need to rest, Doctor, Izuku said politely. The neurological strain will require extensive sleep. Yes, of course, the doctor nodded eagerly, clearly glad to leave the confusing case alone. I'll let you rest. We'll monitor you overnight. The doctor left. Inko kissed Izuku's forehead, promising to go down to the cafeteria to get him some real food, leaving Izuku alone with the skeletal blonde man standing by the door. Once the door clicked shut, Toshinori locked it. He turned to Izuku, his sunken blue eyes filled with an intensity that commanded the room. Suddenly, steam exploded from his body. In a flash of terrifying speed and power, the skeletal man expanded, his muscles bulging, his shadow looming over the bed. I am here! All Might boomed softly, mindful of the hospital setting, striking a heroic pose. Hello, All Might, Izuku said calmly, not flinching. All Might coughed, a bit of blood dripping from his chin as he instantly deflated back into his skeletal form. He looked genuinely surprised. Usually, the boy was vibrating with excitement. You're remarkably calm, young Midoriya, Toshinori noted, pulling up a chair beside the bed. I've had a very long few days, Izuku replied. And a very enlightening near-death experience. Toshinori's expression turned somber. He bowed his head deeply, his blonde hair falling over his face. I came here to apologize, the number one hero said softly. And to thank you? Izuku watched him silently. On that rooftop, I told you to be realistic. I crushed your dream. I told you that you couldn't be a hero without power, Toshinori said, his voice trembling slightly with shame. And yet, when that villain attacked, when all the professionals, including myself, stood back and made excuses, you, a quirkless boy, were the only one who acted. Toshinori looked up, his eyes shining. You spurred me to action. You reminded me of what it truly means to be a hero. It is not about quirks. It is about the body moving before the mind has time to think. It is about the spirit of self-sacrifice. Izuku felt a warmth spread through his chest. It was the validation he had craved his entire life, delivered by his greatest idol. But it didn't feel like the end of a journey anymore. It merely felt like the beginning of one. Thank you, All Might, Izuku said sincerely. Furthermore, Toshinori continued, leaning in close, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I saw what you did. The energy you manifested. The doctors say you are biologically quirkless, yet you produced power that rivaled my own. I don't pretend to understand it, young man, but I do know this. You have the heart of a true hero, and now, it seems, you have a power of your own. Toshinori stood up, his skeletal frame somehow radiating immense majesty. I came here to make you an offer, Izuku Midoriya. I came here to deem you worthy. Izuku tilted his head. Worthy of what? My quirk is a secret, Toshinori explained, his eyes burning with intensity. The public believes I was born with super strength, but the truth is, my quirk was passed down to me. It is a sacred torch, passed from generation to generation, cultivating power with each bearer. Izuku's photographic memory instantly cataloged this information, analyzing it against the known laws of quirk biology. A transferable quirk. An accumulation of power. It was staggering. Its true name, Toshinori whispered, is one for all. And I want you to be my successor. I want to give you my power. Silence hung in the hospital room. The offer was the ultimate fantasy. It was everything Izuku had ever wanted. The power of All Might. The guarantee of becoming the #1 hero. If this had happened 3 days ago, Izuku would have wept uncontrollably and accepted on the spot. But Izuku wasn't just Izuku anymore. He was Dr. Stephen Strange. He understood the mechanics of energy, the limits of the human vessel, and the delicate, terrifying balance of the soul. Izuku closed his eyes. His mind ran a billion calculations a second. One for all is pure kinetic, biological energy, Izuku reasoned internally. It is tied directly to the physical cellular structure. Magic, on the other hand, is eldritch energy drawn from the multiverse. It requires a biological conduit, but it flows through the spiritual meridians, not the blood. If I accept one for all, Izuku concluded, the horrifying realization dawning on him, the biological energy of the quirk will clash violently with the multiversal energy of the mystic arts. My physical vessel will not be able to contain both. The moment I try to cast a spell while holding one for all, the conflicting frequencies will tear my cellular structure apart at the molecular level. I would literally explode. Izuku opened his eyes. He looked at All Might, his hero, the man who was offering him the world. I am deeply, profoundly honored, All Might, Izuku said softly, his voice thick with emotion. You have no idea what it means to me to hear you say I am worthy. Toshinori smiled broadly. Then you accept? No, Izuku said. Toshinori froze. His jaw dropped. Pardon? I must politely, but firmly, decline your offer, Izuku said, sitting up straighter, looking the symbol of peace directly in the eye. Toshinori looked like he had just been slapped. I don't understand. Midoriya, this is the power to become the greatest hero in the world. You proved your bravery, but whatever power you manifested today, it almost killed you. One for all will give you the strength to shatter my body, Izuku interrupted gently. Toshinori silenced. All Might, Izuku said, choosing his words carefully. He couldn't tell the #1 hero about the multiverse or reincarnation. It would sound like absolute lunacy. The power I awakened today, it is not a quirk. I cannot explain its exact nature to you yet, but I know how it works. It is incredibly taxing on my physical body. Izuku held up his trembling hands. To master this power, I have to dedicate every fiber of my being, both physically and mentally, to its discipline. If I were to accept your quirk, the conflicting energies inside my body would be too much. It would destroy me. Toshinori stared at the boy. He had expected excitement, tears, maybe hesitation born of insecurity. He had not expected this calm, terrifyingly mature, analytical rejection. You are certain? Toshinori asked softly. I am. Izuku smiled, a small, genuine smile. You need a successor, All Might. Someone who can take your torch and run with it, undistracted. I have my own path to walk now, and it is going to take everything I have just to survive it. Toshinori looked at Izuku for a long time. The skeletal hero slowly smiled, a look of profound respect washing over his face. You are a truly remarkable young man, Izuku Midoriya, Toshinori said, bowing his head again. Most men would have let greed blind them to their limits. You possess a wisdom far beyond your years. Toshinori stood up straight. If you will not be my successor, then I will make you a different promise. I will keep the secret of your power, whatever it may be, and I will help you enter the hero course at UA High School. Will you accept my guidance? I would be honored. Izuku bowed his head. Good, Toshinori grinned, a spark of his old fire returning to his eyes. The UA entrance exam is in exactly 10 months. Whatever this power of yours is, you said it taxes your physical body, correct? Immensely, Izuku admitted. I need to build physical stamina, or the energy will fry my nervous system. Then we have work to do, All Might declared. Rest up, young Midoriya. In 3 days, meet me at Dagoba Municipal Beach Park. Wear comfortable clothes. Your true training begins. Dagoba Municipal Beach Park was a tragedy. Once a beautiful coastline, it had become a localized, illegal dumping ground due to the changing tides. Mountains of rusted refrigerators, broken washing machines, shattered tires, and twisted metal frames stretched across the sand for miles. The smell of rust and decaying seaweed hung heavy in the air. At 6 a.m. on a brisk Sunday morning, Izuku Midoriya stood before the ocean of trash, wearing a simple gray tracksuit. This is your training ground, All Might announced, standing atop a rusted pickup truck in his muscle form, before puffing out a cloud of steam and reverting to his skeletal state. If you want to build a physical vessel capable of holding immense energy, you need to tear your muscles down and rebuild them stronger. You will clean this entire beach by the UA entrance exam. Izuku looked at the impossible amount of trash. 10 months to move thousands of tons of garbage? That's insane. Heroes do the insane every day. Toshinori laughed, tossing Izuku a pair of heavy work gloves. Get to work, kid! And so, the hellish regimen began. Izuku didn't use magic. That was the whole point. He needed his biological muscles to become dense, durable, and packed with stamina. He spent hours dragging heavy tires through the thick sand, his legs burning with lactic acid. He pushed rusted washing machines, his back screaming in protest. But Izuku had an advantage he never had before: Stephen Strange's discipline. A sorcerer supreme knows that the body and the mind are deeply connected. When Izuku felt like he couldn't take another step, he didn't whine or cry. He retreated into his mind, using ancient Kamartage meditation techniques to block pain receptors and regulate his breathing. During his breaks, while Toshinori assumed he was simply resting, Izuku was working on his true power. He would sit cross-legged on the sand, facing the ocean. He would draw mandalas in the sand, studying the geometry of the spells. He practiced the hand signs, the mudras, until his fingers blistered and bled, striving for the absolute, mathematical precision required to weave reality. In the 3rd month of his training, Izuku encountered a massive problem. Teleportation, Izuku thought, sitting in his room late at night, staring at his notebook. Sling rings. In Kamartage, sling rings are constructed from a specific, multiversally resonant alloy forged in the fires of the sanctums. I don't have access to that metal. Without a sling ring, traveling across the world, or across dimensions, was incredibly dangerous and required vast amounts of energy. Izuku needed a focus. The next day at the beach, Izuku began hoarding specific types of scrap metal. Copper tubing, silver plating from old circuit boards, and brass fittings. He snuck them home in his backpack. Using his mother's gas stove, and a very rudimentary heat-shielding spell to avoid burning the apartment down, Izuku melted the metals together. He poured the molten alloy into a makeshift clay mold he had constructed. When it cooled, he broke the clay. Inside was a rough, unpolished 2-finger ring. It wasn't a Kamartage masterpiece. It looked like a piece of junk. But when Izuku slipped it over his left index and middle fingers, he felt a faint, resonant hum. It will have to do, he thought. The next morning, before All Might arrived at the beach, Izuku stood near the water's edge. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the sand. He held his left hand out, the makeshift sling ring glinting in the dawn light. He raised his right hand, 2 fingers extended. Visualize the destination, Strange's voice echoed in his mind. Focus. Do not look at the space you are in. Look at the space you want to be. Izuku closed his eyes. He visualized the top of the rusted pickup truck 100 yards down the beach. He pictured the rust patterns, the angle of the sun, the sound of the waves from that exact location. He opened his eyes and began to move his right hand in a wide circle. Sparks. A few pitiful, sputtering orange sparks fell from his fingertips and fizzled out in the sand. Izuku grunted in frustration. He tried again. And again. And again. For weeks, alongside his grueling physical training, Izuku practiced the portals. He learned that his lack of a quirk made the magic flow easier, but his physical exhaustion made focusing incredibly difficult. By the 6th month, the beach was half empty. Izuku's body had transformed. The scrawny, trembling boy was gone. Underneath his tracksuit, his muscles were dense and defined. His core strength had skyrocketed. The dull ache in his head that accompanied his magical usage was becoming less frequent. It was a rainy Tuesday. All Might hadn't come due to hero duties. Izuku was alone on the beach. He stood in the rain, drenched to the bone. He raised his hands. Visualize, Izuku commanded himself. He spun his right hand. This time, the sparks didn't fizzle. They caught the air like gasoline. A brilliant, blazing circle of orange, crackling energy tore open the fabric of space. Through the ring of fire, Izuku didn't see the beach. He saw his own bedroom, the posters of All Might looking back at him. Izuku gasped, dropping his hands in shock. The portal snapped shut with a sound like a whip crack. He had done it. He had opened a gateway through reality. A wild, triumphant laugh tore from his throat, echoing over the crashing waves. By the 10th month, the transformation was complete. It was the morning of the UA entrance exam. The sun rose over Dagoba Municipal Beach Park, illuminating a pristine, flawlessly clean stretch of white sand. There was not a single piece of trash left. Standing atop a massive pile of scrap metal that he had neatly stacked on the pier, Izuku Midoriya looked out at the horizon. He was shirtless, his torso carved from marble, glistening with sweat. His green hair was longer, slightly wilder, but his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and unyielding. Oh my goodness! Toshinori Yagi stood at the edge of the pier, staring in absolute shock. You actually did it! You cleaned the whole thing! And look at you! You're a completely different person. Izuku turned around, a calm, confident smile on his face. He jumped down from the pile, landing lightly on his feet without a sound. I told you, All Might, Izuku said, pulling his shirt on. I needed to build the vessel. And the vessel is ready. Toshinori walked up to the boy, placing a heavy hand on his shoulder. Midoriya. I have never been more proud of a student. You have proven that even without my power, you have the drive to be the greatest. Thank you, All Might, Izuku bowed respectfully. Now go. Toshinori pointed toward the city. The UA exam awaits. Show them what you can do, Izuku nodded. He turned away from the beach, grabbing his backpack. Inside it, safely tucked into a pocket, was his makeshift sling ring. He walked toward the train station, the bustling city of Muzidafu waking up around him. The nerves that used to paralyze him were completely gone. In their place was a cold, absolute certainty. They expect quirks, Stephen's strange voice whispered in his mind, dripping with anticipation. They expect fire and ice, super strength and speed. They expect biology. Izuku approached the massive, imposing gates of UA High School. Hundreds of prospective students were pouring in, chatting nervously, showing off their abilities. Izuku stopped at the gate. He slipped his left hand into his pocket, his fingers brushing against the cold metal of the sling ring. Let's show them, Izuku thought, a smirk mirroring the Sorcerer Supreme crossing his face, that the universe is much bigger than they think. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the towering, H-shaped glass structure of UA High School. To the thousands of hopeful teenagers flooding through the front gates, it looked like a fortress of dreams. To Izuku Midoriya, it looked like an institution of profound, yet fascinating, ignorance. A school dedicated to the cultivation of biological anomalies. The voice of Stephen Strange echoed in his mind, tinged with a blend of academic curiosity and aristocratic condescension. They have no idea how small their universe truly is. Izuku adjusted the straps of his backpack, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. Let them have their universe, Doctor, he thought back. We're here to protect it, not to lecture it. The physical transformation Izuku had undergone over the past 10 months was staggering. Gone was the frail, perpetually trembling boy who shrunk away from his own shadow. The grueling, agonizing labor of clearing Dagoba Beach had forged his body into a dense, highly conditioned vessel. But the physical changes paled in comparison to the spiritual metamorphosis. He stood taller, his shoulders pulled back, his spine perfectly aligned. His emerald eyes, once wide and anxious, now held a deep, unshakable calm, the serene stillness of a man who had already died 1,000 deaths and learned to conquer fear itself. As he walked up the paved path toward the massive entrance doors, he didn't trip. He didn't stumble. His spatial awareness, honed by Kamartaj martial arts disciplines, allowed him to navigate the dense crowd with fluid, effortless grace. Out of my way, Deku! A harsh voice cut through the ambient chatter. Katsuki Bakugo stormed past him, his hands stuffed into his pockets, his crimson eyes glaring with a mixture of contempt and lingering, suppressed confusion. Bakugo hadn't forgotten the alleyway 10 months ago. He hadn't forgotten the glowing orange shields or the eldritch blade. But Bakugo's ego had rationalized it. He had convinced himself it was some fluke, a latent, weak quirk that Izuku had hidden, one that couldn't possibly compare to the sheer destructive power of his explosions. "Good morning, Kaken," Izuku said, his voice smooth, completely devoid of the stutter that used to define their interactions. Bakugo stopped, bristling. The lack of fear infuriated him more than anything else. "Don't act like you belong here," Bakugo sneered over his shoulder. "I don't care what weird trick you pulled 10 months ago. This is the big leagues. You're gonna die in there." Izuku didn't flinch. He merely tilted his head slightly, an unnervingly calm smile on his face. "We shall see," he replied softly. Bakugo scoffed, turning away and marching into the building. Just as Izuku resumed his walk, a girl beside him tripped over a slightly raised paving stone. She pitched forward, a gasp escaping her lips. Before she could activate her quirk, Izuku's hand shot out. His reflexes were instantaneous. He caught her by the strap of her backpack and gently pulled her upright, his other hand steadying her shoulder. "Careful," Izuku said, his voice warm and grounded. "It would be a shame to fall before the exam even begins." The girl, a brunette with permanent pink blush on her cheeks, blinked in surprise, looking up at him. "Oh, thank you so much. I was trying to stop myself with my quirk, but you were so fast." She beamed at him, her smile bright and infectious. "I'm Ochiko Uraraka. Are you nervous?" "A little," Izuku admitted, though it was more of an electric anticipation than actual fear. "But mostly I'm ready. I'm Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to meet you." "Midoriya!" She pumped her fists excitedly. "Let's both do our best today." The orientation auditorium was vast, plunging into darkness as the pro-hero present Mike took the stage. The voice hero's attempts to hype up the crowd of examinees were met with dead silence, a fact that Izuku found mildly amusing. As Present Mike explained the rules of the practical exam, a mock urban battlefield filled with robotic villains point value from 1 to 3, Izuku's photographic memory instantly recorded and categorized every piece of data. He didn't need to take notes. The layout of the testing grounds, the time limits, the point distributions, they were all permanently etched into his mind the moment they were spoken. "Excuse me. I have a question." A tall, broad-shouldered student with glasses abruptly stood up, his arms slicing through the air with rigid, robotic precision. "On the printout, there are 4 types of villains. If this is a misprint, then UA, the top hero academy in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. We examinees are here in this place because we wish to be molded into exemplary heroes." The student suddenly turned, pointing a rigid finger directly at Izuku. "In addition, you over there with the curly hair. You've been sitting far too calmly, with a completely relaxed posture. If you are not taking this seriously, then leave immediately." Several students turned to look at Izuku, expecting the boy to shrink in embarrassment. Instead, Izuku simply crossed one leg over the other, resting his hands in his lap. He looked at the tall student, his expression utterly serene. "My posture is an active meditative state to regulate my breathing and heart rate before physical exertion," Izuku replied, his voice projecting clearly across the silent auditorium, lacking any hint of intimidation. "Furthermore, if you had allowed the proctor to finish his presentation, I assume he would have explained the purpose of the 4th, 0-point obstacle. Patience is also a virtue of an exemplary hero." The auditorium fell completely silent. The tall student flushed, his rigid arm dropping slightly. I see. My apologies for the interruption." He quickly sat back down. Present Mike, recovering from his surprise at the smooth rebuttal, pointed finger guns at Izuku. "Right on the money, examinee 7111. The 4th villain is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle, a rampage that will go crazy in narrow spaces. I recommend you listeners try to avoid it. The presentation concluded. The students were directed to buses that would take them to their assigned battle centers. Izuku checked his card, Battle Center B. He noted with a mild sense of relief that Bakugo was assigned to Battle Center A. It was better this way. He needed to focus on his own magic, not on mitigating Bakugo's explosive temper. Standing before the towering, steel gates of Battle Center B, Izuku felt the familiar hum of multiversal energy begin to wake up in his meridians. The fake city stretched out beyond the gates, a sprawling labyrinth of concrete buildings, roads, and alleyways. Surrounding Izuku were dozens of other teenagers, all practically vibrating with anxious energy. They were stretching, mutating their limbs, sparking electricity, and generating minor localized phenomena as they prepared their quirks. Izuku simply stood still, his eyes closed. He didn't need to stretch his muscles. He needed to stretch his soul. He focused on his breathing, visualizing the intricate, invisible pathways that ran through his body. He opened the floodgates of his mind, reaching out into the invisible, shimmering fabric of the multiverse. He felt the cold, sterile reality of the physical world, and directly beneath it, the crackling, infinite warmth of the mystic arts. Hey you! Izuku opened his eyes. The tall student with glasses, the one who had called him out in the auditorium, was marching toward him. I am Tenya Ida from Semi-Private Academy, the boy said sternly. I wanted to apologize for my outburst earlier. However, I must ask, what is your quirk? I do not see you making any physical preparations. Are you an emitter type? Something like that, Izuku smiled politely. I manipulate energy. And there's no need to apologize, Ida. Tensions are running high. Before Ida could respond, President Mick's voice boomed from the massive speakers mounted on the walls. Right, let's start. What's wrong? There are no countdowns in real fights. Run, run, run! The die has been cast. The gates hadn't even fully opened when Izuku moved. His reaction time was not that of a 14-year-old boy. It was the honed instinct of a sorcerer supreme who had fought cosmic horrors that moved faster than light. In a fraction of a second, Izuku was sprinting through the gap in the gates, leaving the rest of the shocked examinees standing in the dust. He's fast! Ida gasped, his engine calves sputtering to life as he scrambled to follow. Izuku dashed down the main street of the fake city, his eyes scanning the rooftops and alleyways. His photographic memory analyzed the terrain, identifying choke points and ambush locations. Clank! 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 From an intersecting street, 3 massive robots rolled out. 2 one-pointers and a heavily armored 2-pointer. Their red optical sensors locked onto Izuku. Target acquired, they droned in unison. Izuku didn't slow down. He accelerated. He raised his hands, his index and middle fingers extending, thumbs crossing his palms. The mudras were executed with flawless, mathematical perfection. Sparks, brilliant, crackling orange energy erupted from his hands, illuminating the shadowed street. The scent of ozone and burning sage filled the air. With a fluid, whip-like motion of his wrists, the sparks elongated, coalescing into 2 long, searing lines of glowing geometric runes. Eldritch whips. The 2-pointer raised its metallic arm, firing a blunt force projectile at him. Izuku didn't even break his stride. He flicked his right wrist. The Eldritch whip lashed out like a striking viper. It didn't just hit the projectile. The magical construct wrapped around it, arrested its kinetic momentum instantly, and violently redirected it. Izuku whipped his arms sideways, sending the heavy projectile smashing into one of the 1-pointers, crushing its chassis and sending it skidding into a wall. 1 point, Izuku thought. The remaining 1-pointer and the 2-pointer charged. Izuku leaped into the air, his physical training propelling him several feet off the ground. He spun, lashing both whips outward. The glowing orange cords wrapped tightly around the necks of the 2 machines. Magic ignores physical durability. The whips were not made of matter. They were made of multiversal energy. As Izuku landed in a crouch, he pulled his arms back with a sharp, brutal yank. The Eldritch whip sheared straight through the hardened steel of the robots' necks, cleanly decapitating them in a shower of sparks and hydraulic fluid. The massive headless husks collapsed to the concrete. 3 points. Total 4. Izuku released the spell, the whips dissolving into golden dust that faded into the air. He exhaled slowly, feeling a sharp, localized spike of heat in his forearms. The biological toll. It was manageable, far better than 10 months ago, but he still couldn't afford to waste energy. Behind him, a group of examinees finally caught up, rounding the corner just in time to see the decapitated robots crashing to the ground. Whoa! Did you see that? What kind of quirk is that? Lasers? Energy ropes? He took out 3 of them in 2 seconds. Izuku ignored them. He needed more points, and he couldn't let the others steal his targets. He needed to move faster than they could run. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the crude, melted metal ring he had forged on his mother's stove. He slipped the makeshift sling ring onto his left hand. Time to widen their keyhole, Izuku thought. High above the fake cities, in a darkened viewing room lined with dozens of glowing monitors, the faculty of UA High Schools sat in silent judgment. In this practical exam, the examinees have not been informed of the number of villains or their locations. A small, white-furred creature in a tailored suit, Principal Nizu, said calmly, sipping a cup of tea. They have a limited amount of time in a vast area. They have to draw out the villains and gather information. It is a test of information gathering, mobility, judgment, and pure combat ability. We've got a good crop this year, the R-rated hero, Midnight, purred, leaning forward. Look at the explosion boy in Center A. He's got incredible combat instincts, and an immensely destructive quirk. Indeed. Katsuki Bakugo, Nizu noted. A volatile personality, but undeniable talent. In the corner of the room, wrapped in a yellow sleeping bag, Shota Aizawa, Eraserhead, stared intensely at the monitor displaying Battle Center B. His dark, bloodshot eyes were narrowed, tracking a specific green-haired boy. Look at Monitor 4B, Aizawa said, his voice flat and raspy. The other teachers shifted their attention. On the screen, Izuku Midoriya was surrounded by 4 3-pointer robots in a dead-end alleyway. The machines were closing in, their weapons primed. Ah, the boy seems trapped, the blood hero, Vlad King, observed. Per situational awareness. He let himself get cornered. Keep watching, Aizawa grunted. On the monitor, Izuku didn't look panicked. He raised his right hand, 2 fingers extended, and began to move his arm in a rapid, circular motion. Suddenly, the monitor flared with blinding orange light. A circle of crackling, fiery sparks tore open the air itself, creating a gateway that revealed the rooftop of a building 3 blocks away. What in the snipe? The masked hero leaned forward, nearly dropping his gun. Izuku casually stepped backward through the fiery ring. The instant he was through, the portal snapped shut. The robots fired their weapons, but they hit nothing but empty brick wall. A spatial displacement quirk? Midnight gasped. Teleportation? Before the teachers could process what had happened, Izuku appeared on another monitor, standing on the rooftop he had just teleported to. But he didn't stay there. He looked down into the street below, where several other robots were roaming. He raised his hands again. The orange energy flared, but this time, he didn't make a portal. He conjured the Tau Mandalas, 2 massive, intricate, glowing geometric shields on his fists. He leaped off the 3-storied building. He's going to break his legs. President Mike yelled. Izuku plummeted toward a 3-pointer. Just before impact, he angled the mandalas downward. The magical shield struck the robot's outer casing. The sheer multiversal friction and kinetic transfer crumpled the robot like a tin can, cushioning Izuku's fall entirely. He bounced off the destroyed machine, landed in a roll, and instantly cast another spell. This is completely unprecedented, Nizu said, his teacup hovering halfway to his mouth. He's using a highly complex spatial warping ability, and then seamlessly transitioning into solid light energy constructs. These are 2 completely distinct, incredibly powerful quirk classifications. Pull up his file, Aizawa commanded. Nizu tapped a few keys. Izuku's application form appeared on a side screen. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk, Energy Manipulation / Spatial Displacement, Late Bloomer. A late bloomer? Vlad King frowned. With that level of mastery? His movements are flawless. He's not just using his quirk, his martial arts form is impeccable. He fights like a seasoned professional who has been training for decades. Aizawa's eyes traced the intricate, glowing runes of Izuku's spells. It's not just the mastery. Look at the energy signature. Aizawa pointed to a thermal and biological readout screen. Usually, when a student uses a quirk, we see a massive spike in biological heat and cellular activity. The quirk factor burns calories. But look at his readout. The teachers stared at the graph. Izuku's biological heat was elevated due to physical exertion, but the energy of the glowing shields wasn't registering on the quirk spectrum at all. It was completely anomalous. It's like, the energy isn't coming from him, Aizawa muttered, a deep sense of unease and intense curiosity settling in his gut. It's coming through him. Fascinating, Nisa's eyes gleamed with raw intellect. Truly fascinating. But true heroics is not just about dismantling mindless machines. Let's see how they handle true adversity. Nizu reached out a small, white paw. He lifted a clear plastic cover and pressed a large, flashing red button. Let's test their true mettle. 45 points, Izuku tallied in his head, leaning against the concrete wall to catch his breath. His forearms were shaking violently. The veins in his neck were pulsing. He had used the stepping stone portals 5 times to traverse the battlefield, stealing kills and outmaneuvering both the robots and the other students. But opening tiers in reality, even small ones, demanded a terrifying amount of spiritual voltage. His unconditioned brain was screaming under the strain of forcing the universe to bend to his will. I need to stop using portals, Izuku thought, massaging his temples to stave off a burgeoning migraine. The eldritch whips and mandalas are cheaper on my meridians. 45 points should be enough to pass the practical, assuming I ace the written exam, which, given our combined intellect, is a mathematical certainty. He closed his eyes, preparing to enter a standing meditative state to cool his nervous system. Then, the ground beneath his feet violently heaved. It wasn't a minor tremor. It was an apocalyptic earthquake. Buildings groaned and cracked, glass shattering and raining down into the streets. Izuku snapped his eyes open. At the far end of the main avenue, the buildings were being pushed aside like cheap cardboard. A shadow fell over the entire fake city, blocking out the sun. The zero-pointer. It was a monstrosity of steel and engineering, easily the size of a skyscraper. Its massive treads crushed roads into powder, and its single, glowing red eye swept over the panicked students below. It's huge! Run away! That's not an obstacle. That's a natural disaster. The examinees broke, turning and fleeing in absolute terror. Izuku stared up at the behemoth. His analytical mind instantly calculated its weight, its armor density, and its destructive capacity. Physical combat is impossible. A portal large enough to displace it would require a planetary-scale magical conduit. I don't have the stamina to cast a spell of that magnitude. Retreat is the only logical option, Strange's voice reasoned smoothly in his mind. It is worth 0 points. Engaging it is a tactical error, and a waste of our remaining energy reserves. Izuku nodded to himself. He turned to run with the others. I'll help. Please! The voice was faint, barely audible over the grinding gears of the colossal machine, but Izuku's heightened senses caught it. He stopped dead in his tracks. He turned around. Through the dust and debris, about 50 yards away, he saw her. The nice girl with the pink cheeks, Uraraka. She was pinned to the ground, her leg trapped under a massive slab of concrete that had fallen from a crumbling building. She was struggling wildly, but she couldn't lift it, and the zero-pointer was rolling directly toward her. Its massive treads would crush her in seconds. The other students were running away. No one was looking back. No one was going to save her. Izuku, Strange's voice echoed, devoid of its previous cynicism. It was grave. Solemn. We are the Sorcerer Supreme. We protect reality. And we start by protecting those within it. Izuku didn't need the prompting. His body was already moving. The exhaustion in his muscles vanished, overridden by a surge of pure, unadulterated heroic instinct. He sprinted back into the danger zone, the dust swirling around him. What are you doing? A student screamed as Izuku ran past him. Are you crazy? Izuku reached Uraraka. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face, her eyes wide with terror as the shadow of the zero-pointer completely engulfed them. Midoriya! She sobbed. I can't move it. Don't worry, Izuku said, his voice carrying a bizarre, echoing resonance that seemed to vibrate in the air around them. He didn't try to lift the concrete with his hands. He knew he wasn't strong enough. Instead, he stood over her, facing the oncoming mechanical titan. I need a localized atmospheric displacement, Izuku thought, his hands moving into complex, rapid mudras. I need wind. Winds of Watum. Izuku roared. He thrust his hands forward. A massive, glowing green mandala erupted from his palms. Unlike the orange eldritch sparks, this magic drew upon atmospheric forces. A localized, violently powerful cyclone exploded from the seal. The magical wind didn't scatter randomly. It acted as a solid wall of kinetic force. The cyclone slammed into the rubble, pinning Uraraka, gently but forcefully lifting the massive slab of concrete into the air and tossing it aside as if it were made of styrofoam. Uraraka gasped, pulling her freed leg back. You moved it without touching it. Can you walk? Izuku shouted over the wind. I think so, she winced. Then run. Izuku commanded, his eyes locked on the 0-pointer. The machine was less than 30 yards away now. Its treads were deafening. Izuku, we have to go, Strange warned. You freed her. Flee. No, Izuku thought back, his green eyes burning with an intense, golden fire. If it keeps moving, the debris will trap others. It will destroy the exit path. I have to stop it. You don't have the energy to destroy it. I don't need to destroy it, Izuku realized, his photographic memory recalling a specific geographical fact he had seen on a map of Muzurifu. UA High School is built on a coastal elevation. The ocean is precisely 4.2 miles to the east. Izuku reached into his pocket. He pulled out the makeshift sling ring, his fingers trembling violently as he slipped it on. Midoriya! Come on! Uraraka yelled from a few yards away, limping towards safety. Izuku didn't move. He stood his ground in the center of the street, staring up at the mechanical god of death bearing down on him. He raised his left hand. He extended 2 fingers on his right hand. He closed his eyes. He didn't visualize a rooftop. He didn't visualize an alleyway. He visualized the vast, crushing depths of the Pacific Ocean. He pictured the cold salt water, the immense pressure, the absolute emptiness. He began to spin his arm. The physical toll hit him instantly. Blood began to drip from his nose. The capillaries in his eyes burst, turning the sclera a violent shade of red. The multiversal energy required to open a spatial tear large enough to consume a skyscraper was astronomically high. His unconditioned body was acting as a lightning rod for a cosmic storm. Izuku screamed. It wasn't a heroic yell. It was a guttural, agonizing scream of pure pain. But the magic obeyed. Beneath the massive treads of the 0-pointer, the street didn't just crack. Reality itself unzipped. A colossal, blazing ring of orange fire, easily 200 feet in diameter, erupted from the concrete. The sound was indescribable. It was a roar that shook the very foundations of the earth, the sound of dimensions grinding against each other. The 0-pointer, carrying thousands of tons of forward momentum, had no ground left to roll on. It drove straight into the fiery abyss. Through the massive portal, the examinees didn't see the street below. They saw a terrifying, churning maelstrom of dark blue water. The colossal robot fell. It plunged into the portal, its metallic shrieks echoing as millions of gallons of ocean water began to violently splash upward through the spatial tear, violently fighting the gravity of the portal. Hold it! Izuku gasped, blood pouring from his nose and ears, his entire body shaking as if he were being electrocuted. He waited until the upper torso of the robot had passed through the threshold. Then, Izuku collapsed his hands together. The portal snapped shut with a concussive shockwave that sent every student within 100 yards flying off their feet. The air pressure equalized so violently that it shattered every remaining window in Battle Center B. The top antenna of the 0-pointer, which hadn't quite made it through the portal, clattered harmlessly onto the wet concrete. Silence descended upon the fake city. The colossal monster was gone. Erased from the battlefield entirely. Dropped miles away into the middle of the ocean. The examinees slowly picked themselves up, staring in absolute, mind-breaking disbelief at the empty space where the metal titan had been seconds prior. A puddle of salt water remained, steaming against the hot concrete. In the center of the street, Izuku Midoriya stood swaying. The crude sling ring on his left hand was glowing a dull, angry red, partially melted from the sheer heat of the magic. He looked back at Uraraka, who was sitting on the ground, staring at him as if he were a descending deity. Izuku tried to give her a reassuring smile. Told you. I was ready, he whispered. Then, his eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed face first onto the concrete, utterly unconscious. The exam is over. President Mick's voice rang out across the battlefield, though it sounded incredibly small compared to the silence that followed. In the viewing room, total pandemonium had been reduced to absolute, breathless silence. None of the teachers were speaking. Even Nizu's teacup had slipped from his paws, shattering on the floor. He didn't destroy it, Vlad King stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the monitor. He moved it. He moved a building-sized mass instantaneously. Did you see the water? Snipe whispered. He dumped it in the ocean. He opened a gateway to the coast. That is a spatial manipulation quirk of a magnitude I have never seen, Midnight said, her usual playful demeanor completely gone, replaced by professional awe. The energy required to do that. It's a miracle the boy didn't disintegrate. All Might, standing in the back of the room in his skeletal form, gripped his chest. A massive, proud smile broke out across his gaunt face. You didn't need my power, Midoriya. You possess a strength of your own, and the heart of a true hero. Aizawa slowly unzipped his sleeping bag and stood up. He walked right up to the monitor showing Izuku's unconscious body, his dark eyes analyzing every pixel. Nizu, Aizawa said, his voice dead serious. Yes, Shota? The principal replied, recovering his composure. That kid. Midoriya. He didn't just use a spatial quirk. He used localized force emission, solid light constructs, atmospheric manipulation, and large-scale spatial displacement. Aizawa turned around to face the faculty. No one has 4 quirks. Not naturally. The implication hung heavy in the air. The teachers shifted uncomfortably, thoughts of a certain ancient, terrifying villain flickering through their minds. You think he's connected to him? Vlad King asked, his voice low. No, Nizu interrupted firmly. Look at the boy's actions. He didn't use that power to show off or to destroy. He used it solely to protect another student, completely disregarding his own safety. He nearly killed himself to save that girl. That is not the methodology of a villain's pawn. Nizu steepled his paws together, a profound sense of curiosity overriding his usual calm. Izuku Midoriya is an anomaly. A complete unknown variable. But he is a hero. Nizu looked up at Aizawa. He belongs in the hero course, Shota. I want him under our protection, and our observation. Aizawa looked back at the monitor. The elderly heroine, Recovery Girl, had arrived on the scene and was leaning over the boy. Agreed, Aizawa grunted. But I'm going to find out exactly what makes him tick. Consciousness returned to Izuku slowly. He felt a soft, wrinkled hand pressing against his forehead. Oh, you poor dear. You push yourself far past the breaking point, a gentle, elderly voice hummed. Izuku opened his eyes. He was lying on a stretcher in the middle of the street. Recovery Girl was standing over him, her lips puckered, ready to use her healing quirk. Wait, Izuku croaked, raising a weak hand to gently push her away. Nonsense, child, Recovery Girl chided gently. You're bleeding from your ears and nose. You've exhausted your stamina entirely. Let me heal you. Please, ma'am, Izuku insisted, his voice raspy but firm. Your quirk accelerates the body's natural cellular regeneration by burning physical stamina. Recovery Girl blinked in surprise. Yes, exactly. You're a smart boy. I don't have any physical stamina left to burn, Izuku explained, sitting up agonizingly slowly. My injuries aren't physical trauma. It's severe neurological and spiritual exhaustion. If you use your quirk on me right now, the stamina drain will cause my heart to stop. Recovery Girl's eyes widened. She pulled back her stethoscope and listened to his chest. Her expression turned grave. Your heart rate is dangerously arrhythmic. You're completely drained of energy. You're right. If I stimulated your cells now, it would be fatal. She looked at the boy with profound respect. How did you know that? Most students don't understand their own limits. I've been a doctor much longer than you have, madam, Strange's voice noted dryly in Izuku's mind. I've studied biology extensively, Izuku lied smoothly, wiping the dried blood from his nose with his sleeve. I just need rest. Pure, uninterrupted sleep. I'll have you transported to the infirmary immediately, Recovery Girl said, waving over a pair of medical robots. As Izuku was lifted onto the stretcher, he looked over and saw Uraraka standing nearby, looking incredibly guilty. Midoriya, she called out, running over. I'm so sorry. You pushed yourself so hard because I was stuck. Izuku managed a weak, genuine smile. It's what heroes do, Uraraka. Are you okay? I'm fine. She nodded vigorously, tears threatening to spill again. Thank you. You saved my life. Izuku closed his eyes as the stretcher began to move. The exhaustion was pulling him back into the dark, but this time, it was a peaceful, victorious sleep. He had passed the test. He had protected someone. He had shown the world a glimpse of the magic that lay hidden behind the veil of their reality. And as he drifted off to sleep, deep within his soul, the cloak of levitation began to stir from its long, multiversal slumber, sensing that its master had finally returned to the stage.